Hello and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. My name is Greg Young, and on behalf of OTC Markets, we are very pleased you have joined us for our next live presentation from Myriad Uranium Corp. Please note, you can submit questions for the presenter in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view the company's availability for one-on-one meetings through the Schedule Meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Simon Clark, Chairman and Director of Myriad Uranium Corp., which trades on the OTCQB venture market under the symbol MYRUF and on the CSE under the symbol M. Welcome, Simon.
Greg, pleasure to be here. Okay, so I think I'm just going to go through the presentation here. So just a little bit of a background on Myriad. Myriad Uranium is the proud owner of the Copper Mountain project in Wyoming. As people probably know, Wyoming is one of the key jurisdictions globally for uranium. Lots of large deposits and a big history of mining uranium over previous decades, and a great jurisdiction from a regulatory perspective. So we're delighted to be there. At this point in time, Myriad Uranium has an option to earn in for 75% of the Copper Mountain project. And it's 50% of the way through that. We're very close to 75%. I think our total spend under the option agreement has to be about $5.5 million, and we're close to $5 million. So we'll be at 75% shortly, and then there is a process for us to get to 100% ownership. So we're delighted with the work so far on the project. I think the key points on this project is after we signed the LOI to acquire it, we discovered a lot of historical data on the project that had been lost. We knew that Copper Mountain itself was a historic producer. There are 2 or 3 historic mines, in particular Arrowhead, that produced with grades up to 5%, and during the Cold War era in the 50s and 60s produced 750,000 pounds, and several other little mines in the district also produced some relatively significant mines. So we know it's a really intriguing area for uranium production historically. As I say, after we embarked on the LOI and moved forward on the project, we discovered that the project had been held by Union Pacific Railroad during the 70s, and they did a lot of work, about $117 million in today's dollars went into the project, and 2,000 holes were drilled. They defined 6 deposits, had internal resources for those deposits of 15 to 30 million pounds, and they had a mine plan set up with the goal of supplying, in those days, California. Edison was looking to build nuclear reactors in California, and this was going to supply those reactors. They were focused on mid to low grade, near surface mineralization. And as I say, they did a lot of work on that to advance the project. So obviously, for us to discover that data after we had entered into the agreement to acquire the project was a major discovery. Saves the company tens of millions of dollars potentially in exploration work. And really our focus has been initially on validating that data through the drill bit ourselves, advancing the project forward. The project also was owned in the 90s by a company called Neutron, and then in the last cycle in the early 2000s, ahead of Fukushima, it was owned by a couple of companies, including Strathmore, and there was an opportunity to acquire this project. As I say, in 2021 was the initial agreement between the optioner, and then we were able to as I say, option the project from them in 2023, and we've been making very fast projects. So that's some of the progress. Sorry, so that's some of the background to the project. You can see on the introduction some of the highlights. And if I move forward just on obviously the investment thesis side of it, obviously domestic uranium is more and more critical in the US. There's been much publicized issues around supply of uranium globally. Nuclear has become, again, seen as a key source of baseload generation. It truly is the only 24/7 dispatchable power that's available that is completely environmentally friendly. Obviously, historically, people have had concerns about waste and how you manage these projects, but I think a lot of that has now been worked out through history, and it's clear that wind and solar, whilst an important part of the energy mix, cannot give the dispatchable power that's needed for baseload. So nuclear is enjoying a renaissance. There's a lot of countries that have renewed their nuclear fleets and are looking to add to those. The US is one of the biggest players, if not the biggest nuclear fleet globally, and requires a large amount of uranium. Roughly 50 million pounds a year needs to go into the nuclear fleet in the US, and only about 2 or 3% of that is produced domestically. And then you layer on that the backdrop of conflict in the world and issues with a number of the players. Russia, one of the main refiners on the nuclear side and upgraders of uranium, is essentially been taken out of the mix. There's obviously been well-publicized issues around production in Kazakhstan, one of the key places for production. And so the US really does need to secure its own domestic supply and supply through its allies. And so there's a real focus on pounds in the ground in the US itself. And as I mentioned, within the US, Wyoming is probably the best jurisdiction historically for uranium exploration and production, and the regulatory regime there is very strong. So we're very well positioned. Moving forward, I won't get into too much of the detail behind uranium. I mean, obviously the uranium price has moved very strongly over the last year or two. The spot market has kind of been in a holding pattern, but the long-term contracting has continued to grow significantly. And as you can see from these charts, the future for uranium looks extremely bright at this stage in the cycle, again, especially for domestic projects. So, again, this slide just demonstrates again and reiterates the fact that Wyoming is a tier 1 jurisdiction. You can see from the map there the number of projects that have been producing in Wyoming and also are under exploration and development. And you can see the location of Copper Mountain in the middle of Wyoming there, a historical mining jurisdiction itself, and again a history of previous production at Copper Mountain. And then certainly a lot of development and exploration dollars spent through the 70s, with additional work being done by the latter owners in the 90s when the price spiked, and then some more work in the early 2000s. So Union Pacific developed a plan with 6 deposits, as I mentioned, and an estimated internal resource of 15 to 30 million pounds. They also did a lot of testing of other potential deposits around the core of Copper Mountain, and had a target, effectively an exploration target of about 65 million pounds. So this really does have the potential to be a major asset, one of the biggest in the US if we can prove it up to 65 million pounds. And indeed, a number of the subsequent owners believed that the potential for copper was greater still than that 65 million pounds. So we're extremely excited to be working and getting good results on the ground. And you can see the timeline here from the 50s with the early production, in the 70s with Union Pacific doing a lot of exploration work. And then you can see the ownership from 1997 to 2012, and then when the option was, the project was acquired by the optionor, and then again, our deal to get involved. And, our work in recent times, obviously we did a lot of planning. We got our permits to drill this year, an initial 5-acre disturbance permit, and our target initially has been, and you can see on this map, there's a mix of what were deposits defined by Union Pacific, and then other target areas where they did some exploration drilling, but never got those deposits up to the point where they were actually defined. Sorry, those targets up to the point where they were defined deposits. So, lots of additional target areas as well to build on that core resource. And it should be pointed out, and I should have made it clear up front, that the Union Pacific work stopped at the end of the 70s and early 80s with the incident at 3 Mile Island, which really did impact the price of uranium, and a lot of exploration and development work stopped after that accident. And indeed, the proposal to put nuclear power into California at that time with Edison was shelved, and so Union Pacific moved on from the project. And again, it lay dormant. And again, looking at the timeline, going back here, until the project was then in focus again in the mid-90s, and then obviously in the 2000s. So, flipping back to this slide, we have a mix of what I would term defined internal deposits and mine plan, and a bunch of other target areas. And we really focused our efforts this year on one of the key deposits. Our results more than proved the Union Pacific thesis, really again focused on low to mid-grade near surface mineralization. But the results went further than that. They actually had higher grades than a lot of what was reported internally by Union Pacific, and our drilling also showcased the potential for deeper mineralization as well. So, if we look at where we will target next, what we're doing now is we are permitting a much bigger plan of operations to drill a further 150 holes. We'll do more definition and delineation work on the original deposits that were highlighted, and then we're going to test some of the other targets. The interesting thing about Copper Mountain as a project, it is actually a mix of different styles of mineralization. It's a granite-hosted project, in that the hills behind the Copper Mountain project contain a base of about 50 to 75 ppm uranium, and it's that uranium that is through water and melt moved into an area of fractured granite, which is really where the key deposits were originally focused, and those fractures are what contains the higher grade uranium. Then there is a transition zone where some of the early mines were focused, where you got grades up to 5%. And that transitions out of this fractured granite into more of the traditional Wyoming sedimentary roll front style of mineralization. And we do believe that this is going to be a mix of fractured granite, somewhat like was very prevalent in France. The French have obviously had a nuclear industry for 50 years, and they sourced a lot of their uranium in France from granite-style deposits in the Massif Central and further south in France. They worked those deposits out, after 30, 40 years, and then a lot of their efforts were focused securing uranium overseas in Africa and other parts. So there is a history of very good and high-grade, rich deposits from fractured granite globally. So it's not an unknown style of mineralization. again, quite unique in a Wyoming setting. But again, we also have more of the roll front, which is more of the typical sedimentary style of mineralization that you see in Wyoming. So moving quickly through this, and again, this is the Union Pacific mine plan and slides around its initial deposits. Again, 6 deposits feeding a central mill, and they did a lot of work, spent a lot of money on it, and again, our drilling this summer has very much, to our mind, validated a lot of that historic data and really helped us identify where we're going to move next, and obviously delineate those deposits, come out with a resource, but spend more time as well, more time and money focusing on some of the other target areas on the sedimentary side that were identified by Union Pacific as potential targets. Again, this is historical exploration and development, and just emphasizes the work that's been done. This is very much a brownfield project because of the historic work, and we're not, going blind into a project area. We know where Union Pacific drilled, where they had success. Our drilling now validates that data and really will help us short circuit and speed the process to resources and new discoveries of new deposits. Again, this is really focused on the fractured granite zone, the historical area where Union Pacific focused, and you can see they really targeted the top 500 feet on this deposit, 500-600 feet, and you can see where some of the historic drilling was, and the shaded area is what I would term low to mid-grade uranium. And then what we're finding through drilling deeper, and a couple of their holes also indicated the presence of higher grade mineralization in some of these faults and structures that we see in this fractured area. So, a lot of potential. Not only, we really feel that we validated that base case of Union Pacific now, with lots of potential to add additional mineralization and pounds in the fractured granite area, but also, as I mentioned, in the transitional zone and moving into the sedimentary piece of the project, where we also believe we're going to be able to build on exploration work and define some further deposits. I won't dwell on this. I think I've spoken mostly about it. You can see again where the historical drilling was and the deposits that were defined in the other target areas. This area here is really where we focused our initial drilling. One of the key core deposits, and with some higher grade sections in it, and we've gone in, validated that, and also taken the exploration further. Obviously, using modern day exploration techniques that they didn't have in the 70s has been very helpful to us. Magnetic surveys, for example, correlate extremely well with historic drilling and the drilling that we've done. And, we are, now that our drilling has paused for the year, we now need to put in place a bigger permit for further drilling. We are going to focus on more technical work, more magnetic and radiometric surveys. And based on the success of the program this year, we are also staking additional areas to make sure that we've got the whole of the project fully locked up. What we've seen has really given us a lot of confidence moving forward here that this is going to be a significant project to supply domestic uranium in the US. And this is just some of the specific drill results, again, confirming the historic data. You can see the numbers there, so I won't dwell on that slide. And again, Canning was the biggest deposit of the 6 that were found by Union Pacific. And you can see the intercepts that we're getting, which are higher than a lot of the historical data, which Union Pacific was, it was internal. They were fairly conservative with what they were doing, and they were very much looking to validate the economics at those conservative levels, which they did. We believe the grades are higher, and again, that there are further higher grade sections deeper as well. So the scale of this project, I think, is only just beginning to be realized. As I mentioned, Union Pacific felt the whole area could host at least 65 million pounds, and some of the subsequent owners went as far in internal memos to talk about potentially 200 million pounds. So it's brownfield, lots of room for expansion. We've just started the process. Lots of drilling and further excitement to come as we move forward here. Again, won't dwell on that. That's potential, as we've talked about, for additional deposits and further discoveries. And you can see the exploration plan that we had for 2024, which we've executed on, and the dollars that we've spent, and we've exceeded the objectives that we set out. So we feel really good about what's happened. This here is the slide that shows you the major catalyst for the company. Next phase is really looking into building out resources here. The historical data will help. Obviously, we need to drill on top of that, and then also adding on other discoveries across the wider project area. But you can see the timelines and the catalysts, and again, we've done a good job of hitting those in 24, and we're pretty confident based on those results as we move into 2025. I won't dwell on the thematic. I think everyone on this call probably understands it, but you can see where the deficit is and where it's targeted to go, even with new production and new discoveries coming online. It's clear that certainly as we look at it today, that the deficit is going to continue and is only going to continue to grow. And from a domestic perspective, that's even more exacerbated. Again, we produce a fraction of the uranium domestically that is required in the US alone. And that's just echoing that point that the West is highly vulnerable here, and we really do need to build our own supply chains and strengthen what we already have. That's the US supply gap that I already talked about, even more stark, even when compared to the global slide. And again, hitting on the geopolitical rifts. So, I think everyone knows these thematics. Hopefully, that's given you a good overview of Copper Mountain and its scale and potential. And we think we're really well positioned as we go into 2025. So it's probably a good time to stop the presentation and to answer some questions. And I see that we've got some through. There's a question about in situ, and that's a really good question. What I would say about Copper Mountain is the fractured granite part of it is probably more conventional mining than in situ leach. However, as with a lot of the other projects in Wyoming, as you move into the sedimentary phase, we do believe that in situ leach will be possible. We obviously have to fully validate that. That's just based on other projects around us and what we see on the ground. But we do think there will be a in situ leach component to this project. But it's somewhat unique in that we have several styles of mineralization, and that also gives us a far bigger project than most of the in situ projects that you find in Wyoming. There's a message here from Paul Rankin about the depth of oxidation. Nice to hear from you, Paul. We've not yet fully identified that. As I mentioned, the real focus of the initial drilling was to validate the Union Pacific thesis for its core deposits and the mine plan, and which really was the low to medium high grade near surface. But we did enough work and did some deeper holes that do tell us that the mineralization continues at depth, and the potential for higher grades and some higher grade deposits themselves at depth remains. And so, that thesis is very much intact, not fully proved out. and there will be, obviously, that will be a bigger and bigger focus as we head into next year's more extensive drill program. And then moving on, Trump recently stated that Canada will receive fully expedited. Yeah, listen, I think you know, a lot of what we've seen on critical minerals has been bipartisan. So I do think you know, that regardless of administration, critical minerals are well placed. But you know, I think with the the administration that is coming in, obviously America first, and finding uranium in domestic jurisdictions in the U.S. will be more and more helpful. So I think any incentives to help that. What I would say is Wyoming is an extremely good jurisdiction. It's one of the best jurisdictions in the world. But you know, you could definitely say that the permitting process in the U.S. does need to be overhauled, especially for critical minerals, to be more to be faster. You know, you don't need to give up any of the environmental side of things, which needs to be done and looked after, but you can definitely streamline approvals and permits. And I think this administration for sure is going to help that side of things, and help make sure that we can find and develop a lot of the uranium that is in the US and needs to come into the supply chain. So I think that's I haven't seen that comment about companies investing $1 billion plus, but I do know that there's lots of incentives at state, and we shouldn't underestimate the state and federal level to help on the uranium side, as part of the critical mineral side of things. And then looking at the last question here, that's again about federal and state grants. We are actually talking to a group locally in Wyoming that has accessed some state funding on a number of projects. So we're looking at a couple of scenarios where it may be possible to access those funds. I do think the federal side is going to become more and more important. Obviously, nuclear has a lot of very strategic connotations, not just for power plants, but on the military side as well. And for strategic reserves and that kind of stuff, I do think you are going to see more and more capital. There already is capital available through the DoD. I think that will expand. And I do think the incoming administration will be good for mining in general, from a permitting perspective for sure, and an encouragement to mine. I think uranium, obviously, to my mind, is probably up there right now as one of the most critical of all minerals, and I think there will be a big focus on that. So with that, I think we're nearly at our time here. I think I've answered all the questions. And I just stress again, at a time when pounds in the ground domestically are really, really important, this project has the potential to be one of the biggest in the United States, certainly in Wyoming. And, the availability of this historic data was a game changer, has been a game changer. It's really helped us, fast track, and will continue to help us fast track things. And the drilling that we've been able to do in this first phase has more than exceeded our expectations. So we're really excited about 2025 and driving the project forward. I think the setup for uranium is very, very strong, as I've said, and I think this is going to be a big and key project in that context. Thank you very much.